Hey YouTubers, this is Garrowin again with another video. Today we're going to be gunsmithing the Stevens Model 94 single shotgun. This particular one is a 20 gauge. I got this off of a friend. I borrowed it off of him. I want to do some work on it for him. Their primary complaint was that the hammer years ago broke off, and so they took a screw and screwed down into the hammer since the striking face of it was still fine, and they just use this screw to pull back on it. But as you can imagine, digging the head of a screw into your thumb is pretty painful at times. So they want me to fix the hammer on it. I've also noticed some blemishes in the wood here, some rust on the metal, so I'm going to do the best I can to kind of clean it up for them and fix the hammer and get it looking a little bit better for them. Now the first thing you want to do, before you start taking it apart, I've already done it before I started recording, but just for all the safety Nazis out there, you always want to check to make sure that it's clear. Alright, now this is very similar to a lot of other single shot shotguns. I've got a Harrington and Richardson that comes apart exactly the same way this one does. You want to have a very wide flat screwdriver. It doesn't have to be a Winchester brand, gunsmithing screwdriver set, but the wider you get, the better for this screw right here, because it's got a wide notch and it's a pretty big head. And if you've got just a regular screwdriver tip like this and you put in there, it might work, or you might just twist the tips of or bend the tips of your screwdriver tip. So you want the biggest one you can get that will fit in here to keep from damaging your screwdriver heads. But you just take this screw out of the bottom of the foregrip. This one's pretty chewed up. You can see some damage to the wood. I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's the screw itself, pretty chewed up. Put that in a little tray over there. And that one screw makes it possible to do a whole lot. You pull down on the foregrip. There it comes. I didn't want to. Foregrip comes off. Once the foregrip is off, you hit the brake action here to drop the barrel. And as the barrel drops, it releases that bottom hook, and then you just pull back on it a little bit, and it unhooks from that little peg right there. So now we have removed the barrel and the foregrip, so we can get into looking at the problem area of the gun that they wanted me to look at. Now, even if you're not doing gunsmithing work and working on the weapon, this is a good idea to do once in a while on your shotguns, because a lot of people never do this, which means this area down in here gets neglected. And you would be really surprised about how much dirt and grime can get down in here and sometimes make your weapon start to rust. We've got the action apart. We've got the trigger guard taken off. I didn't film that, but it's just two flathead screws. It's pretty straightforward. Now, to take the stock off, we need a couple of different tools that aren't in any of these. You need a small flathead screwdriver to fit in the holes back here, where there's two flathead screws that hold the recoil pad on. And then once you take the recoil pad off, there's going to be a big long screw down inside the stock here that attaches the stock to the action. And that's where these guys are going to come in handy. If you've ever seen these big swords that are screwdrivers, these are amazing for this kind of thing right here. If you decide to get into gunsmithing, even if it's on just your own firearms, don't bear down on your screws like it's the apocalypse, because most firearms are really overbuilt. Alright? And if the screws in your recoil pad are torqued down at less than 1,000 pounds, your weapon is still going to function just fine. You're not going to have any problems with parts flying off. The recoil pad is not going to suffer any increased damage. Screws in parts like this that have no exposure to 99% of the heat and pressure that takes place in the action. Just snug, just finger tight, you know, snug enough to where they won't just walk out on their own, and that's perfectly fine. Let's try this one because I've bent the crap out of that screwdriver. There we go. So I think that one's loose. Okay, so there's your recoil pad. Alright, so now here's what I was talking about. Let me put these off to the side here. Here's what I was talking about with that big long hole. There's one big screw down in here that is what attaches the stock to the action. And this one is a flathead. So we go with our flathead sword here. There it goes. Okay. Well, slipped off there. Now when you're loosening this one, you might want to have it laying down on a table after you get it loose enough to turn with your fingers, because since this is the only screw holding the action to the stock, you don't want it to just fall off into the floor. Because I have personally never taken one of these exact rifles apart, and so I'm not sure if there's any kind of spring tension or something. So you don't want things to just fall off on the floor on you. I think it's all the way out. So there's that. And then the stock should come right off. So there's your stock. This is another thing that if you want to do this on a regular basis, because we still have not exposed any of the springs in the action. You know, this is the whole firing mechanism for this shotgun. You've got your barrel here, obviously, that chambers the shotgun shell and takes the majority of the pressure. But the whole trigger and hammer mechanism and everything is completely enclosed in this. So you can take your weapon apart this far, even as a novice, and not have to worry about losing anything terribly important, okay? So you can take your stock off and oil it in here once in a great while. You don't have to do it every single time you fire the weapon, but you know, once a year or so, open it up and make sure nothing's gotten in there. So the action is the part that we're concerned about, and this is where things get tricky, because there's a lot of springs and things of that nature. So I'm going to take a minute, examine how exactly this thing's put together, and then we'll be back. I've got the action, I've got started here on removing the hammer pin. I don't think it's a tapered pin. It's just I used a 3/16 punch, which fits just about perfectly. I started knocking it out. There does not appear to be a whole world of tension on the hammer spring, but just in case, I am going to wear some eye protection. And I'm going to make sure that when I clamp it to the table, I point it this way, so that if it flies anywhere, it's going to be maybe off in this general direction. You can see that there is a retaining bar that's seated into the hammer spring that actually makes contact with the hammer, and the hammer spring itself sits in a recess back here that's in the same spot as where the stock bolt screws in when the whole weapon's assembled. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp this guy down and finish knocking out this pin. That should be fine. And see if we can't need a little bit of an, there it goes. So a little bit of tension, but nothing too outrageous when it's all the way forward like that. Now just looking at this pin, it may actually be tapered. And I may have just guessed the right way to put it, because I see some cuts made in this side of the pin. So if anybody's curious, I drove this out from the right side coming out the left. So I will put this on my tray, release that, and now let's take a look here. There's our retaining bar here, and our hammer just falls right out the bottom. So here's the broken hammer. You can see how it goes in from the bottom. You can see you've got a sear on the bottom of it here that gets engaged by the trigger. So you've got to kind of finagle it around so that it is both engaged by the trigger and, there it goes, has its hole lined up with that pinhole. Alright? And once that's done, you have a recess in the back of it here where this retaining bar rides and presses forward with the tension of the hammer spring. So I'm going to set these guys off to the side here. And I'm not going to mess with any more parts on this because everything else appears to be in fine working order. But I'm going to call this video here because we've gotten to the point where I've got the old hammer out. It might take me 3 or 4 days to get a new hammer in the mail or to figure out what exactly I'm going to do to maybe extend this with something. I don't know. But I've gotten you to the point where you've removed the hammer, you've gotten to your action, and so that was my primary goal today. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions, or if you would like to see other videos like this, feel free to post a comment below and I'll get back to them as necessary. This is Garrett out. Y'all have a good one.